So food is then sent into the duodenum. And once it reaches the duodenum, what happens? So in the duodenum, there is secretion of two juices, but it is only one of them that acts on proteins, on starch. That is pancreatic amylase. So that pancreatic amylase then breaks down the undigested starch from the mouth, because sometimes food doesn't take very long in the mouth to have all of them broken into maltose. And from there, the digestion of your portion stops after it is broken. Then the food is then pushed into the small intestines by, in the form of a chyle, which is small, soluble, and semi-solid form. Now from the intestine, it now gets another enzyme, several enzymes now that breaks what? Maltose. So you get an enzyme maltase, which breaks down maltose into glucose. You get another enzyme called sucrase, which breaks down sucrose into what? Into glucose and fructose. Then you get another enzyme called lactase, which breaks down milk protein called lactose into milk sugar in form of lactose into glucose and galactose. Meaning that that is where the end product, because the other I'm talking about glucose, fructose, galactose, they are all soluble products of digestion of your starch. Now, after the digestion, what happens? Then the food diffuses through the walls of the small intestine, that is now in the ileum, through a microvilli. Once that food enters into that blood vessels, then the blood carries these sucrose, or carries these glucose into the liver. Once it reaches the liver, then some of it is broken down to release the energy by cells. Of course, they move throughout the body cells. Those that remain are then converted into glycogen. And remember, they are stored and then later used during the time for starvation. I have talked about an account. I have talked about whatever happens to starch from the time I take it in the mouth, what happens in the mouth, in the stomach, what happens, in your duodenum, what happens, in your small intestine, what happens, when it goes to the blood, what happens. Then in the end, I am talking about that balance of the unabsorbed food in the stomach, in the small intestine, is then pushed to the colon, where removal of water takes place, and then the balance removed as an egester in the process you call defecation. I have talked about entirely everything about what? About starch. Now, members, I want you to watch some small video in regard to the digestion of the food we take. I hope you're able to see the screen.
What is up, beautiful ladies out there? Ryan's sitting here enjoying an ice cream cookie sandwich.
Are we able to see that?
Fat molecules, some protein molecules, and a ton
Yes?
of carbohydrates.
Yes.
Okay, listen
Yes.
carefully, and I'm going to ask questions.
The carbohydrate molecules from food. A quick review. There are three main types of carbohydrates. Monosaccharides, which are single molecules, molecules, which are many monosaccharide molecules bonded together. And some shorter strands of polysaccharides are often called oligosaccharides. Our bodies produce and release enzymes that basically break down larger carbohydrate molecules into smaller units. There are two places that carbohydrate digestion or breakdown takes place: in the mouth and in the small intestine. In the mouth, salivary glands release salivary amylase, which is an enzyme that starts breaking down starch molecules. Starch is a polysaccharide molecule that contains a large number of glucose units bonded together, and it is found in many foods, including rice and potatoes. Once the food or bolus is swallowed and enters the stomach, the salivary amylase. There's virtually no digestion of disaccharides until they reach the small intestine, and we'll cover them in a minute. As the bolus moves from the stomach into the duodenum and jejunum, which are the first parts of the small intestine, the pancreas releases pancreatic juice into the small intestine. This juice contains pancreatic amylase, which is an enzyme that continues the breakdown or digestion of starch into shorter strands of glucose. The brush border or microvilli, which are tiny hair-like projections located on the enterocyte cells of the small intestine, also contain enzymes that finish the breakdown of starch into single glucose molecules that are ready for absorption. Now for the 2-unit disaccharides, which my ice cream cookie had a ton of. So the 3 main disaccharides are sucrose or sugar, which is comprised of a glucose molecule and a fructose molecule, lactose, which is galactose and glucose, and maltose, which is 2 glucose units. The enzymes that act on these are sucrase, lactase, and maltase, which are also located on the brush border of the enterocyte cells. So basically the body has broken down these carbohydrate molecules into glucose, fructose, and galactose units. Glucose and galactose are mainly absorbed into the enterocyte cells through an SGLT1 protein transporter on the membrane of the cell, and fructose is absorbed into the cells through a GLUT5 transporter. On the other side of the enterocyte cells, glucose, galactose, and fructose are transported out of the cell through a GLUT2 transporter into the blood, where they travel to the liver. In the liver, fructose and galactose are mainly converted into glucose. The actual glucose molecules from food can be taken up by the liver and stored as liver glycogen, or they can become part of blood glucose and be used by cells throughout the body as energy. They can also be taken up by muscle cells and stored as muscle glycogen, or they can be converted into fat and stored in adipose or fat tissue. And folks, that'd be the basics on how carbohydrates are digested and absorbed. You can hit the thumbs up or thumbs down. If you have any comments, you can leave those down below. Till next time, folks, I am out of here. That's pretty good.
Okay, members, have we seen?
Get up to 60% off real brands.
Members,
When you shop during the Junior Brand Fest.
have we seen how they are digested?
Yes.
Does it give you some clear understanding of the breakdown? You are seeing how the long chain is breaking into two into one, and then how it is absorbed and when it reaches the bloodstream. Is it possible in the same way for you to discuss how members?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yes.
Okay. Actually, now you have your smartphones. You can Google those videos. You can talk about video or video for the digestion of protein, video for the digestion of starch, video for the digestion of fats and lipids. You can Google them and then be able to watch how they are broken. It strengthens your understanding of these processes. Now, when these fatty acids are digested, now we look particularly at that largest organ that performs this role. Like I was trying to tell you the other time, members, that please make sure you protect your liver, because the liver is the most at-risk organ. They are killed because their work is to metabolize your proteins, break them down into a form that will not move as toxic things in your blood. And sometimes you overload it with the chemicals in the foods that we eat. I see some of you eating salads that are got from tomatoes. These tomatoes are not properly washed. They contain a lot of marathon dust. They enter into our liver. They destroy our liver. Some of you want to take a lot of alcohol. Alcohol also destroys liver cells, and therefore they ensure that the functions of the liver are minimized. Then you have other toxics like those poisons that we take, like in cigarettes, those those things that are in smoke. They all destroy our liver. Liver can be transplanted, but the chances of you succeeding in a liver transplant is 0.5%. Very few people, 1 out of 200 people can have a successful liver transplant. Meaning that, first of all, the moment they give you another liver, the body has a very high chance of rejecting it. And then this liver you are seeing can start fighting you. because it also has a lot of blood vessels and chemicals in them that fight the pathogens, that fight diseases. The moment it refuses to fight the diseases, then it fights your body. And therefore, your own liver that has been transplanted will be the one that will kill you. You have heard of this general who had the liver that was transplanted. I think in Uganda, died shortly. Does charcoal affect someone's digestive system because people eat it? No. Now, charcoal is only used as an adsorbent. Adsorbent means that it is able to absorb fluids, because, by the way, charcoal absorbs a lot of water because it has spaces in between them that can absorb, number one, water. Then number two, it is adhesive to poisons. Sometimes they remove poisons that are in your food. Even, by the way, like snake bites, when a snake bites you and then you put especially animal charcoal at the point where it is bitten, then immediately that charcoal is able to absorb poison. So it doesn't affect, but only that it reduces on the water content. So sometimes it causes constipation. And that's why, especially people who are diureting, they take charcoal. That taking charcoal means that you're removing much water from your food, from your feces, such that you release that water. So charcoal is not a treatment for diarrhea. Listen, because it doesn't kill the germs, but it can be used to stop diureting, loss of water, because it can absorb as much water back as possible, such that the feces you are giving out will be having less water. Yeah, actually, it is only advisable for one to take charcoal if you are releasing very watery feces, or what we call diureting. You can take charcoal. But if you take charcoal when you are not releasing that, the chances are very high that it will thicken and make your stomach hard, and then there will be a lot of difficulty in releasing the feces by process of what we call now constipation. So it is not advisable for a normal person to take charcoal, but it is advisable for someone who is highly diureting to take, so that it can absorb much water. And also someone who has taken poison, maybe accidentally you took a poison, it is also advisable that you take charcoal, because that charcoal can remove the poison. So once it takes the poison, then it minimizes the chances of that poison entering in your blood through the small intestines. Of course, the charcoal captures it, and it doesn't allow it to move just together with the food into the bloodstream. So if you have taken poison, if you are diureting, you can take charcoal. But if you are not in any of those categories, you must minimize or even not use it, because the chances are very high that you are going to harden the food substances in your stomach, and you're going to get a lot of difficulty releasing in form of defecation. Okay, I think we can continue. So the liver is an organ with the most functions. Like I have told you, one of them is assimilation and metabolism of carbohydrates. I've talked about that, breaking it into carbon dioxide, converting them into glycogen, and then stored, and then releasing energy in form of that breakdown during respiration. Assimilation and metabolism of proteins, meaning that the proteins can be used in building new proteins like hormones and enzymes, which are very good regulators in the body. Then part of it is used to build new cells that replaces those that are worn out. Then there is assimilation and metabolism of lipids. I have talked about that lipids are eventually converted in form of the fatty acids, can be broken down to release the energy used by the body, and part of it can be deposited on your skin in terms of regulating your temperature. It prevents any escape of heat. Actually, lipids are very good insulators. Then there is also production of heat during that metabolism, which aids in regulation of body temperature. That's another role in the production of heat. During metabolism, like the breakdown of glucose to carbon dioxide produces heat. Even the deamination of amino acids produces heat. That heat now moves together with the blood into the bloodstream, resulting into production of heat. That helps to regulate the body temperature. The liver is also important in that it manufactures plasma proteins. I was talking about those proteins that are produced. One of them is plasma proteins that is very useful in blood clotting. Then there are also proteins like albumin, the globulin, which are very important in the process of stopping bleeding. There is also a very important function in the production of bile. Remember, the gallbladder is found within the liver. So that bile is produced in the liver and stored in the gallbladder. That green thing that you always see in chicken or in cows, very bitter, is produced by the liver. And then that bile is very useful in the emulsification, breaking down lipids into smaller particles that can now be digested easily. Then it is also very useful in the storage of iron and other minerals. So these ions are important that for them, when they destroy your worn out cells, they remove the iron from them and store them for future formation of red blood cells, meaning that red blood cells can also be formed in the liver, especially for young people, because of that iron that is stored. Then it is also very useful in formation of red blood cells, because that iron is what constitutes the hemoglobin. So here, the red blood cells are, sometimes they are transferred through the blood to the bone marrow, where they are also produced. So they store iron as a raw material. The liver is also very important in that it helps in the storage of the blood. You remember, the liver is very bloody. Very bloody. Actually, when you touch the liver and squeeze it a bit, it releases a lot of blood. So it stores a large volume of blood, up to about 1.5 liters of blood is stored in the liver. So it acts as a reservoir of blood in the body. Then the liver is also very useful in detoxification. It converts toxic substance into harmless form. So if you destroy your liver, it means that if you take any toxic, it will not be able to convert it. An example is amino acid that we like eating that meat too much. It has a lot of that amino acid. When left in the body, then eventually they become very toxic in the body and can kill all your cells. But what the liver does is that immediately you take your meat after enjoying, it has a big task of deaminating it and then converting it into urea. And then it can be removed through the kidney. And then it is also very useful in elimination of sex hormones, especially the testosterone and estrogen, which is actually sent to the liver for excretion. Sometimes when we feel sexually aroused, the body releases a lot of these sex hormones, especially estrogen in females and then testosterone in females. This must be removed. Actually, it keeps you in that state of excitation. Then also, you will also realize that there are some hormones like adrenaline, which is released, especially when you are scared. When you are scared, adrenaline is released immediately, and then once they are formed, they go into the bloodstream. And fortunately, we have the liver. The liver will be able to break them down, especially into, you convert them into urea, and then they are removed. Otherwise, if your liver is not functioning well, if you get shocked so deeply, and a lot of adrenaline and noradrenalines are released in your blood, the chances of you collapsing to death is very high. But thank God we have that organ, the liver, that performs that role. By the way, these are just few examples, but the liver has more than 500 functions in the body. It is actually an organ in the body with most of the function. So the last segment of our discussion will be now summarizing digestion in herbivores. Herbivores are those organisms that chew cud. They are those ones that have four-chambered stomach. Four-chambered stomach. In human beings, we have only one chamber of the stomach. In herbivores, like the goats, like the cows, like the lambs, like the giraffes, all of them have 4 chambers, and therefore they are called herbivores. Because for them, they eat plant materials like the leaves, and all these contain cellulose. Remember, for us, we don't have cellulose digesting enzymes. So because of that, we can't break. But in herbivores, they have the cellulose digesting bacteria. For them, they are capable of releasing an enzyme called cellulase. remember, for us, we have amylase. For these ones, they have cellulase. So for them, they can be able to produce that by a bacteria that is found in their stomach. That bacteria produces the enzyme cellulase, which breaks down cellulose. Now into what? Into glucose, galactose, and fructose, which are soluble processes. So fortunately, some of these microorganisms live in the guts of herbivores. They are harmless. Actually, you find a lot of bacteria in the stomach of a cow, but they don't harm it. Instead, they release their enzyme, cellulase. They break down cellulose that is found in grasses. And once they are broken down, they produce nutrients that are absorbable by these cows. Fortunately, even that bacteria also benefits. Once they are broken down, then they also take in that soluble food for their survival, and the cow will also be able to take it. So that association, which is beneficial to both, we call it symbiotic relationship or symbiosis. So the bacteria gets a housing, gets shelter from the cow, then it breaks down the food, and then the cow also take it. So that feeding relationship is called symbiosis. So how does digestion take place in ruminants? Remember, I've told you ruminants are those animals that chew cud, including cows. Cud means that it first swallows, then it is released back, and then it continues chewing. That process is called regurgitation. So you'll find that what happens is that a cow takes in that grass or the leaf, and it goes into the stomach in a part called the rumen. It is stored there for some time, and then later it is returned back to the mouth for further chewing. Now that process of vomiting out or pushing out what had already been taken into the stomach and then rechewed is what we call regurgitation. Mark that word, regurgitation. So regurgitation is the process by which the food that had already been taken into the rumen is later returned back to the mouth for further chewing. We call it regurgitation. By the way, some of you regurgitate. You are sleeping at night, you find yourself chewing. That is not normal for a human being. A human being takes food once and then it is digested because you don't take cellulose. But here, the food first goes into the rumen. And then from the rumen, it meets that bacteria, it ferments. After fermenting, it is back to the mouth for chewing. Now, during the chewing, then now that soft broken piece is now broken into smaller composition. Now, in the stomach of a rumen, all this is possible because the stomach of these ruminants are divided into 4 chambers. Now, this is the outermost of that, where food is temporarily stored, and then it is regurgitated. It is taken back for chewing. So when you look at the stomach of a ruminant, it has 4 parts. There is a rumen, there is a reticulum, there is omasum, and then the abomasum. By the way, abomasum is like a book. When you look at those offals of goats and cows, you'll find there are those that are book-like, which is the abomasum. Then this one here is very smooth. It is very smooth and slippery. And then you have the rumen, which is the outer one, with a lot of that finger-like projection that you always see, where rough food, the grasses, the leaves, which are not properly chewed, are stored. So this is how the stomach of a ruminant looks like. It has the larger one called the rumen, where undigested and unbroken and unchewed foods rest first. So what happens is that this food enters through the mouth, temporarily chewed, goes to the rumen. Once it reaches the rumen, it is stored for some time, then it goes back to the mouth for the chewing. Now, after it is chewed and now it is soft and small, then it comes here and then enters into the reticulum. Now, from the reticulum, then it goes to that book-like structure called the omasum. Then from the omasum, it goes to the abomasum. The abomasum is where most of the digestion are completed. Then now it goes into the duodenum and the other digestive processes takes place. So this is the structure of the stomach of a ruminant, which I think you should be able to see that. Now, what happens now in terms of that digestion? So in the mouth of ruminants, there is no enzyme, meaning that the digestion of cellulose does not take place. Does not take place in the mouth because the mouth does not contain any enzyme. So it is only chewing, which is physical digestion, that takes place in the mouth. So in the mouth of a ruminant, only physical digestion takes place. Now that gives the difference between ruminants and non-ruminants. In ruminants, they actually do not have any digestive enzyme in the mouth. But in non-ruminants, like human beings, we have salivary amylase, meaning that both chemical and physical digestion takes place. So in terms of mastication, remember I talked about mastication being equivalent of chewing. So it is just to soften food, and then food is taken into the esophagus by also the process of peristalsis. Now, once the food enters the rumen, which is the largest component of the stomach chamber, food is stored temporarily. Then fermentation, remember it has some bacteria. Fermentation takes place where an enzyme is released by bacteria, and that enzyme is a cellulose digesting bacteria called cellulase. Now, the moment fermentation takes place, then that enzyme is released. That enzyme now does what we call breakdown in the absence of oxygen. Now, during that fermentation, there is release of a weak acid called lactic acid. Now, the process of respiration in other non-ruminants results into production of carbon dioxide and water. But in that fermentation, which is anaerobic respiration, it brings what we call lactic acid. So once this is fermented, then the food is taken from the to the reticulum, and then it is brought back to the rumen where regurgitation, chewing now takes place. So the moment it now takes the food back to the mouth, then little of it is chewed and then taken back to the stomach. Remember, food enters here, then once it reaches here, fermentation takes place, then it is taken back for chewing, and then it is brought back, and then the process keeps on going. But the purpose is now to convert that cellulose into a soluble product of digestion. Now, once the food enters the reticulum, then the bacterial action still continues, meaning that the food is finely ground. And here there is separation of those rough materials. The undigested cellulose are retained, the stones are retained, the bark of the tree, which may not be digested, is retained. But then all those small things like pieces of wood, like small stones, are retained in the reticulum. Reticulum, by the way, like I've told you, is where there are those smooth chambers, which actually we shall see when you return. But try to get maybe these offals and then look at them. Then the omasum is where you have a parallel leaf-like compartment with rough surfaces. So in that omasum is where you have that book. Food enters in between that book. And then because it is rough, it keeps on being ground. And then there is also mixed with water, and then food is absorbed. Then once the food enters into the true stomach, which is the abomasum, then the enzymatic digestion on proteins takes place. Of course, the same way, the proteins are broken by proteases, which may include pepsin, may include trypsin. So they are broken in the true stomach, and then all these are done in the same way like they occur in humans, like we had discussed before. Then all these products are also absorbed in the small intestines, in the offals, because they also have the villi like we have in human beings. So that is digestion in ruminants. Then in termites also there are some digestion that occur because for them they eat wood, they eat dry leaves, but this is only possible because there are some bacteria called the protozoans that also contain cellulose. And this cellulose digests or breaks down cellulose into maltose, and therefore they can be absorbed by the plants. So what is the comparison between ruminant and non-ruminant digestion? Now, the similarities, number one, is that in both the young animals have a single stomach where digestion takes place because they all digest milk. Then the final digestion of proteins and carbohydrates takes place in the small intestine. Remember, I have told you now, once it is broken in the Bamazam, then the final digestion of maltose, of sucrose, or fructose then takes place in the small intestines. What about the differences? The difference is that for ruminants, they chew cud. They actually vomit back the food they have eaten, and then they return it back. But then for non-ruminants, they do not chew cuds like us. For ruminants, they have a 4-chambered stomach. For non-ruminants like us, we have a single stomach with only 1 chamber. In ruminants, the salivary amylase or ptyalin is absent in the saliva. For non-ruminants like us, we have the ptyalin or the salivary amylase. In ruminants, most of the absorption takes place in the stomach. In the non-ruminants, digestion, most of it takes place in the ileum. And then for ruminants, water absorption takes place in the stomach, but then for non-ruminants, water absorption takes place in the colon. Actually, after the digestion, the waste materials with excess water is pushed to the colon or the large intestine. That's where digestion takes place. So members, that brings us to the end of digestion in animals. Maybe what we shall look at briefly would be the dental formula, the dentition, which we shall look at later, how the teeth are arranged in the mouth of both the ruminants and non-ruminants, and it will tell us what type of foods they feed on. So is there anyone with a question as far as we have gone? Any question? Yes, members, any question? Okay, if there is no question, then we are going to watch some short video, and when it ends, that would be the end of our lesson for today.
Meet Sally.
So have
Sally's lunch contains a sandwich, a banana, and a yogurt. All of these foods contain carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Carbohydrates include fiber, starches, and sugars. All sugars and starches provide 4 calories of energy per gram. The sugars in her lunch include sucrose, fructose, glucose, and lactose. Did you know that sucrose, one of the sugars found naturally in the banana and added to the yogurt, is the same as in table sugar? Let's follow the sucrose molecule's journey to see what happens once it enters Sally's body. The body's digestive system is like a giant food processor. It starts with chewing, which helps break down the food to smaller pieces. The sucrose molecule travels down Sally's esophagus, through through her stomach and into her small intestine. Enzymes in the small intestine work like scissors to break the sucrose into one glucose and one fructose molecule. Glucose and fructose are absorbed into the bloodstream and carried to the liver. Here, fructose is converted to glucose or used for energy. The liver releases the glucose back into the bloodstream for use throughout the body. Did you know that glucose is the primary source of energy for the body? Our bodies need to maintain a balanced and constant supply of glucose because many organs depend on glucose to work properly. The brain, for example, relies primarily on glucose to function. In fact, restricting the brain's glucose supply can impair both memory and ability to focus. When the glucose derived from her lunch is used up, Sally starts to feel hungry. Her liver can make new glucose from its stores of glycogen or other sources to help Sally last until dinner. Sometimes, Sally may eat more than her body needs, and the extra calories could be stored as glycogen or fat until Sally needs more energy. Maintaining a balanced diet, moderating overall calorie intake, and keeping physically active helps keep the body well-fueled and healthy. For more information, visit sugar.ca.
Okay, thank you very much, members.
60% of
Let's
bread,
stop here
20 short
and
bread festival.
we have a good day.